In the following film, you will witness all the alcohol-related fatalities that took place on one typical day on America's highways. On this day, May 17, 1986, 81 men, women, and children will lose their lives. Midnight, Saturday, May 17, 1986, an ordinary weekend night. About 1 out of 10 drivers on the road has been drinking. In the next 24 hours, 81 Americans will be killed in drunk driving crashes, 1 every 18 minutes. Dead will be innocent pedestrians, passengers, and drivers, as well as intoxicated drivers themselves. But at midnight on May 17, no one on the road has any thought that they might be next.
That's more great country music for you from K-Law, the country giant. Glenn Boyer here with you on this Friday night. Of course, we're coming up on midnight, a new day, May 17th, a Saturday about ready to begin, and it is raining cats and dogs. The meteorologist around here says it's not going to get any.
12:01. Alcohol claims its first victim, Magdalena Metaxas, age 42. Police estimate that Ms. Metaxas was going about 45 miles an hour when she missed a turnoff and slammed into a steel signpost. Her autopsy revealed that she'd been drinking that evening. Her blood alcohol count was .25, over twice the legal limit for driving. Magdalena Metaxas is the first statistic of the day. She was a mother of 4. At exactly the same time, 800 miles away, another mother and her child are killed in Lexington, Kentucky.
Police are investigating a Fayette County crash that occurred at 12:01 this morning, killing 2 people. 30-year-old Frances Davis of Ballard County and her 12-year-old son were killed on Old Richmond Road. The car they were riding in was struck head-on by one driven by 23-year-old Jimmy D. Gray of Lexington. Police say both Davises were wearing seat belts, but because Gray was traveling so fast, the belts didn't help. No charges have been filed yet against Gray, who is suspected of being involved in a tavern fight before the accident. The police say they think alcohol and high speed may have led to the fatal crash.
There were 3 people in the car that was hit by the drunk driver. Only one of them survived, Linda Blevins, the sister of the dead victim.
When the car stopped, it was so quiet. There was nothing except stillness and quiet. I remember screaming. And as I tried to get out of my car to open the door, the light came on, the interior light came on. And that's when I looked over and saw Fran. And I knew she was dead.
Dead were Linda's sister, Frances Davis, and her oldest son, Chad. Frances' husband, Gary, and their son, Michael, were driving in a car just behind theirs. Gary was the first to find the bodies of his wife and son. The shock was so severe that Gary was soon hospitalized for depression. 9 months after the deaths of his wife and son, Gary is still struggling to get life pulled back together for himself and for his 8-year-old son, Michael.
The effect is total devastation, if you could put it in a word. Chad and Fran had shared so much of my life. They were my life. It's such a void, and really there's nothing to look forward to. I think how devastating this is. I can't go on, my life is, and I think, what about Michael? What is it like? He's lost his mother. and his brother, who was his mentor. The word that I've heard more people describe Fran is bubbly. She bounced when she walked. She never caught her without a smile. I'm a shy kind of guy, you know. I'm not much for crowds. You know, she would fit in anywhere. It makes you angry, frustrated. Look what I had, you know. This was my beautiful wife and my family, and it's gone. People go by the bar, get a drink. They're not, you know, they know they're drunk when they go in. You know, they say, well, he wasn't responsible for his actions. He was drunk. It's a shame. You know, he just had too many to drink. He was sober at one point. He was sober when he drove to the place or when he knew he was going to be driving home.
The driver of the car that killed Francis and Chad Davis was 23-year-old Jimmy Gray. On the night of the collision, Gray and his family spent 4 hours in a local tavern. Gray had about 8 beers and got into a fight. In his drunkenness, he smashed his car into several trucks in the parking lot, then took off down the road at about 75 miles an hour. Less than a mile from the tavern, he crashed into the Davis car. He was injured, but he ran from the scene. A prosecutor pressed for the maximum charge. The jury agreed. Gray was convicted of 2 counts of murder and sentenced to 70 years in prison. It is one of the longest sentences ever given for a drunk driving fatality. Prosecutor Ray Larson.
There really is no difference between taking a gun and aiming it at a crowd and shooting it than getting in a 2-ton car and aiming it up the road with little or no control behind the wheel. And people are requiring that we make those people responsible for what they do.
The lives of the survivors will never be the same. For Linda Blevins, thoughts of the crash now dominate her life.
I've redone it 1,000 times. You know, if I would have cut the car the other way, he would have hit my side. If I would have gone a different route, 1 stop sign. And there's flashes for no reason. I will see them that night. Or I will see the lights come on. And it's like when it happens, I just freeze inside. I can't, I don't know how people go on to make a normal life for themselves. I don't know if I will ever be normal again.
Saturday, May 17, 1986. By 1 minute after midnight, 3 lives are already lost because of drunk driving. 2 mothers and a 12-year-old child. The next drunk driving crash of the day happens at 12:20 in California. Hugo Martinez was a passenger. 2 minutes later in Kansas, 18-year-old Mike Nichols is walking home when he is struck by a drunk driver. 12:35, 65-year-old Mary Free becomes the oldest casualty of the day when her car is struck by a group of kids who'd been drinking at a grad night party. The next 3 deaths are intoxicated drivers, all under 25. 1:10, Deborah Landrum's car is hit by a drunk driver in Tampa, Florida. Over the next 50 minutes, 7 more people will be killed, 1 every 7 minutes. All are drivers who have been drinking. .207, social worker Paul Corrales is walking home when he is hit by a drunk driver. 2:10, in Delaware, a drunk driver is killed. At the same time, in Massachusetts, a passenger dies. At 2:30, 4 deaths. 2 friends in New Jersey, a young man in Georgia, and just outside of Chicago, the 24th death of the day. 17-year-old Spiro Cladis is struck by a hit-and-run driver. It was grad night. A night of fun for the seniors of Leiden High School. But Spiro Cladis and his best friend, Steve Raftis, had car trouble. A tire blew on Spiro's car and there was no spare. They began walking toward home.
So we were going to the gas station just up ahead. You know, as we were walking, you know, Spiro was in front of me, and I'm walking, you know, around the gravel, you know, on the side of the street and everything. And Spiro, you know, I was too busy, you know, upset about the car and everything. And I see his headlights, you know, just cut in, you know, from nowhere. I didn't have enough time to scream or nothing. My first impulse was just to jump out of the way, you know, and try to grab my friend. As I tried grabbing my friend, you know, the side of the car hit me and he just took him. I got up and I tried finding him. I found him like 100 yards up ahead of me, you know.
Suspect vehicle, pedestrian PI, serious injury, southbound Elmhurst Road, possibly mid-sized pickup truck, red in color.
Within minutes, the Elk Grove police had a call out on a hit-and-run vehicle. A few miles away from the accident site, Officer Charlie Schaefer spotted the car.
Saw a vehicle going westbound on Thorndale, and as the vehicle approached me, the headlights appeared to be swerving back and forth.
Central 2136 have attempted to stop a red Toyota pickup proceeding eastbound Thorndale from Wooddale Road.
I followed the vehicle. I tried to stop him. He didn't stop for about a mile.
Central 2136, a vehicle stopped in front of the Salt Creek Country Club on Thorndale.
The driver of the truck was very drunk and belligerent. As Schaefer went to subdue him, he spotted the damaged hood and shattered windshield. The driver, 35-year-old Ray DeLapp, was arrested.
Relax. Just relax. Mr. DeLapp was combative. He couldn't explain the damage to his car. In fact, he came around finally admitting there was damage to his car, but it was his on-again, off-again personality. He was switching from, well, remorse, saying, well, yeah, I know I hit something, to I wasn't in no accident. And then I feel that he probably would have just denied the whole thing. He would have gone home, got sober, and forgot about it, and wondered the next morning how his car got all racked up.
DeLapp had a history of drinking problems. That night, he was so intoxicated that he remembered nothing of hitting the pedestrian.
When I woke up in jail, the police asked me, basically, do I know what happened? Do I know what I was in here for? And I said, no, I don't. He said, well, you killed somebody last night. Well, it was quite a shock to me. And I guess I couldn't believe it at first that it was actually happening. I was thinking maybe I'd wake up out of a dream. It'd all be over with. From that point on, they told me I'd have to go to court that morning. And when I got in front of the judge had told me again that you know what you're in here for. And I said, yeah, the officer had explained some of it to me out there. He said, well, you ran over a kid. And I passed out on the floor. I guess I had to accept it at that point.
DeLapp pleaded guilty to vehicular homicide and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Ray DeLapp has been married for 17 years and is the father of 3 teenage sons. He has worked for the same company for 14 years. Now in prison, Ray DeLapp sees his family for a few hours every other weekend.
I'm going to do 5 years in this prison. And in this prison, it's done with me. But I'm going to have this feeling of guilt for the rest of my life. And that's something I'll never get rid of. If there was a way I could change places, I'd have done it. I'd have done it in a minute.
The pedestrian that Ray DeLapp killed, Spiro Gladys, was just about to graduate from high school. At age 17, Spiro was an accomplished violinist, as well as a very popular student and Steve Raftis' best friend. 6 months after the accident, on November 2nd, Steve and some of his friends have gathered to commemorate Spiro's birthday. Today, Spiro would have been 18.
It's different, you know, it's right next to you, you know, your best friend really dies, you know, you've known him for, 16 years. At first I wouldn't even think about my friend being dead, you know, my best friend. And then, you learn to accept it, and, the world doesn't seem a nice place as it used to be, you know. Happy birthday, Spiro.
By 2:30 on this Saturday morning, May 17, 1986, 24 people are dead. One killed every 6 minutes. 10 minutes later, and only 10 miles away, a drunk driver dies. The next 3 fatalities are passengers of intoxicated drivers in Louisiana, Texas, and Alabama. The next 4 deaths are drunk drivers, including Jeffrey Demos, who in a bizarre coincidence crashes into an ambulance as it is picking up James Finn, the victim of another drunk driving crash. Next are 2 more passengers of drunk drivers in New Jersey and Texas. At 4:15, 2 drunk drivers collide in Illinois. At 4:30, a drunk driver in Memphis, Tennessee. And then, just before dawn, John Adams hands his car keys to a drinking buddy and is killed as a passenger in his own car. John was stationed at Fort Polk, Louisiana. He'd been in the Army for 16 months. The driver of the car he died in was his good friend, Mike Miles.
The day of the accident was pretty much a normal military day. Not a normal day, but a normal military day for myself. We'd just come out from a field exercise. We'd been in the field for a few days.
Tone of tent. Report.
So finally we were released for the day. I guess it was about 5 o'clock. And John and myself had talked about it earlier in that day. Why don't we go out tonight? Let's run down to Lake Charles, maybe go to Chasers or something.
Even though John had to be back for duty the next morning, John and Mike decided to drive the 85 miles to their favorite dance club in Lake Charles.
Sometimes you just want to get away from the GI scene, just want to get away from that every once in a while. So we'd gotten down there, I guess it was about, say, 8:30. We went in there, just, started having a few drinks. Then I probably drank about, say, 6 beers, somewhere around that area, and a couple of mixed drinks. I had really not expected to drive that night, but John had asked me to drive, and John was the type of person that when he did drink, he got a little drunker than most. I was a little reluctant, but he had to get back to post next day because he had duty the next day. So I agreed to drive, and like I said, we left about 4 o'clock in the morning. And I didn't feel extremely drunk. I felt buzzed, of course, but I didn't feel like it was anything that I couldn't do. And like I say, for a while, it seemed all right. Of course, I was the one who was drunk, so I don't know if it was all right or not. And like I say, after I passed a couple cars, I really don't remember too much after that. I guess that's when I started getting tired and falling asleep.
about 5 o'clock in the morning, just south of DeRitter here in Beauregard Parish. You apparently went to sleep, lost control of the car, went off on the right side, came back across the highway onto the left side and skidded into a tree. And unfortunately, Mr. Miles, the car crashed into that tree in the passenger side where John Adams was seated, and it crushed him and killed him. It was such a severe impact, young man, that special equipment, the so-called jaws of life, had to be used to extricate him from that, but he was dead.
I was shocked that John had died. It was a scary feeling to be charged with negligent homicide and on top of losing a friend and then having to go to jail.
Step in front of the white and back up against the wall. Place the board in front of you, chest high.
This is the first time I've ever been in trouble with the law at all. I've never been arrested before.
Back up
against the wall. Had a pretty clean life, I guess you could say.
Proceed on down the hall, come to 7W on your left, turn and face the cell and wait.
After the accident, Mike pleaded guilty to driving while intoxicated. He faced having his license revoked, a discharge from the Army, and a long-term jail sentence.
We have the case of State of Louisiana versus Michael D. Miles. Please come forward, Mr. Miles. Mr. Morton, you represent Mr. Miles?
Yes, Your Honor, I do.
All right, you may approach the bench with him. Mr. Miles, you were in this court yesterday afternoon, and to me it came down to being a very simple matter at that time. I read what had happened, and I thought, well, there's no problem. Miles is going to jail for the maximum term allowed by law in Louisiana for a DWI first offense and going to pay the maximum fine. But there's something very unusual about this case, Miles, that I have to say in my experience is something I've not encountered before. Even though you're represented by counsel here this morning, probably your staunchest supporter and advocate is not your lawyer, but the father of John Adams, the young man who was killed. Now that is strange. He called me this morning. He said he was calling me to ask for mercy for you.
After I talked to the judge told me, he said, well, he said, if that's what you want, he said, this is a very unusual case, you know, for you, the family, to want to do this. And I told him, I said, there's no reason for him to sit there, a friend of our son's, and can't do anybody any good. I said, and Judge, if you will allow him to have the opportunity to help other people by telling them what he did and what happened and the whole thing, I said, that's a lot better off. And the judge agreed with me, and he said, I've never tried it before, but he said, it's worth a try.
There were some special terms, no alcohol.
Because of John's father's intervention, Mike was given a 6-month suspended sentence. Instead of serving jail time, Mike's probation calls for 240 hours of community service, talking to young people about the consequences of driving drunk.
See, some of you probably would have done the same thing. If your friend, you think more about, you don't want to get in trouble from the Army, you think about getting back. You don't think about you're going to die on the way back. You think about getting back so you don't get in trouble. And yes, he knew he was drunk, I knew he was drunk, I knew I was drunk also. But it's just the way it turned out. It's still hard to live with that when you know it was your fault. Maybe not intentionally your fault, but still your fault nonetheless. Some people don't blame me. A lot of people don't blame me. John's parents don't blame me. The court system doesn't blame me, but when you're the one driving the car, there's no way you can help but blame yourself. So it's a pretty hard thing to live with.
Do we need forks?
Right. Yeah, put a couple on the plate.
2 months after the accident, Mike went to visit John's family.
The first time I did meet Mr. and Mrs. Adams and Missy, I was scared, very scared. I didn't know how to take it, what to expect.
I used to kid him, before he was in the Army ROTC. I told Michael the first time he came home, and it took a lot of guts for him to come home that first time, because he had never been here, see. We sat at the table right there, and we had our first few words. And he looked at me, and when I told him that I didn't hold him responsible to his face, and it's just he and I said, I want you to know that I hold you not responsible. I said, I believe that if it was any other way, you would go out of your way not to let it happen. It's a misfortune, it's a tragedy, and it's something we got to live with the rest of our lives, and you got to live with it. But to hold you responsible, I'm not.
I was surprised at first. I really didn't want to be welcomed by them. I could not understand how they felt the way they felt. And
trying to say, hey, now, John, listen now, you don't worry about that. You get home, we'll work that out. Listen, please don't do that. I catch myself trying to give my son advice, and then I say, hey, listen, that's stupid. I can't do that anymore. But it's just a reaction that you have in regards to suffering and trying to get over it. I go to brush my teeth. I look in the mirror and I say, look, maybe John will come home tonight. It doesn't let up. It just gets easier at times and gets worse at times. Most gracious Heavenly Father, I pray that you'll just be with us, you'll lead us and guide us, and you give us strength, and that you'll help some good come out of this that has happened. We love you. We thank you so much for what you've done. We don't understand. We know you do. Go with us, I pray. Amen.
By 5 a.m. on May 17, 1986, 38 lives have been claimed by drunk driving collisions. The next 3 fatalities are drivers who have been drinking. At 6:55 in Ohio, the passenger of a drunk driver is killed. Then a West Virginia driver coming home from an all-night party. For over 2.5 hours, no one is killed. Then at 11 a.m., a mother of 2 was hit by a drunk driver who was just leaving a hot air balloon festival. By noon, with the day half over, 44 people are dead. Just after noon, a drunk driver is killed. Then at 12:08, a drunk driver kills himself and a friend. At 1 p.m., a 16-year-old Georgia driver who had a few drinks dies. And in Enid, Oklahoma, Sue Hankins is driving home from a morning of sunbathing and beer drinking when she crashes head-on into a truck.
Raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do. Mr. Milam, you understand that I'm your attorney, and I'll be asking you a few questions in this deposition today. You understand that?
Yes.
Orville Milam witnessed a car crash that will haunt him for the rest of his life. Fate placed his truck in the path of Sue Hankins' car on the day she died.
How are you employed, Mr. Milam?
I'm a minister and a truck driver.
All right, sir. Now, do you recall the events that transpired on May the 17th of 1986?
Yes, sir, I sure do.
Mr. Milam, as you're driving down the road with your wife and grandchildren, tell us the first thing that you saw, felt, smelled, or heard that was in any way unusual.
Well, as we was driving down the road, we kind of looked often at the scenery and how you just kind of take your eyes off the road for a second and you look back and there was a white car coming on the wrong side of the road, which is the side that I was supposed to be driving on. And I just instantly pulled the steering wheel to the left for a second, and then I swung her back to the right just as hard as I could and tried to miss the car because it seemed like when I went left, the car went left, and when I went right, the car went right.
What's the next thing you remember happening?
The car hit the truck on the left-hand side, and I looked out the left mirror and seen the car going end over end down the highway.
Sue Hankins, the driver of the white car, was killed instantly. Her autopsy revealed a blood alcohol level of .20, twice the legal limit. Sue was one of 10 children in a very close-knit family. She was the family rebel. Sue was an artist and an excellent athlete, but she had a drinking problem. No one in the family, including her mother, could do much to stop her.
Linda Sue and I talked about everything. I knew that she did drink, and she'd come over here, and I would scold her for it. And she'd say, okay, I won't come over no more. I said, no, I want you to come over. At least when you're here, if you want to go somewhere, I'll take you. I don't want you driving, is what I kept telling her. I think her drinking was more or less when she would become kind of depressed about something, and then she would crawl into the bottle. And that's the worst time. The baby smiled happily.
Sue was devoted to her nieces, but eventually family members felt that they had to protect themselves, even if they couldn't protect her.
We even went so far as not letting the kids go with her. You know, a few times because we knew that she had been drinking. And even just a couple weeks before she was killed, I had talked to her about it. And it just didn't seem to soak in.
I hope nobody ever has to go through that. It's bad enough when they grow up, live full lives, and then they pass away. But to have one taken when they're just 28 years old, it seems like such a waste.
Saturday afternoon at 1:20, 49 people are dead. An hour and 20 minutes passed before the 50th. The passenger of an intoxicated driver on the way to a nearby lake. 12 minutes later, a drunk driver dies running an errand. At 3:35, Norman Hill runs his car into Eudine Hoover's car, killing them both. Hill has been drinking. Then 2 more passengers of intoxicated drivers in New York and South Carolina. 4:45, Richard Smathers is on his way to buy steaks for the barbecue. He has been drinking. In Arizona, a pedestrian hit by a friend. In Florida, the passenger of a teen driver after drinks at the beach. Then a drunk driver in California. At dinner time, a mother on her way home. A drunk driver and his passenger. Another drunk driver, the passenger of a drinking buddy. Then, at 8:05, 4-year-old Emily Brennan becomes the youngest person to die in a drunk driving crash on May 17. Her father is driving. After that, 2 more drunk drivers are killed. And in Sheridan, Wyoming, Bill Ross and Todd Wardell are killed driving home from a fishing trip. Saturday was a beautiful day in Sheridan, Wyoming. The perfect weather for a fishing trip. Bill, Todd, and several friends from work drove to Lake DeSmet, loaded down with inner tubes, fishing gear, and plenty of beer. Bill's cousin Steve was also on the trip.
It was a hell of a good day. We stripped down to our shorts and was laying around suntanning and what have you, kicking sand in each other's face, whatever you do on the beach, throwing beer on each other. And finally got the boats launched and aired up and inner tubes aired up. And they didn't catch no fish, but they lost a couple fish and lures and cowbells and managed to catch a good buzz.
Bad weather.
So started getting towards the evening, started to cool down. We got the boat loaded back up. Had a few beers, and when we left there, Todd kind of wobbled down the stairs, and he grabbed a hold of Bill, and they were wobbling around together, and Todd said he had too much to drive. So I said, I'll drive Cavell's pickup. Well, Bill was kind of bold, upstanding him, you know. He'll drive his own car and make it on his way. And we were just kind of bumming along down that road and popped over the hill.
Steve was following close behind Bill's red Fiat. He noticed Bill's car crossing over into the opposite lane. Then instead of getting back into his own lane, Bill's car suddenly went into a side skid, crashing into an oncoming car.
You could see Bill kind of fly up in the seat, and then everything just kind of exploded. All the windows popped out, and it just kind of went into slow motion when they hit. They spun sideways, and the glass seemed like it took forever to hit the ground. And I pulled over to the side of the road and ran out, and I seen, you know, Bill or Todd they were just laying there right then. And Todd was laying on top of Bill. I couldn't see Bill or Bill's face or anything like this.
Bill's car smashed sideways into a blue Chevy Nova coming in the opposite direction. Their combined speeds were estimated at over 100 miles per hour. The two women driving in the blue Nova were badly injured. Bill and Todd were killed.
When the two cars started to come together, the Nova started into the Fiat at about an angle of about 45 degrees, right in the area of the driver's compartment, right through the driver's door. The maximum engagement is more than 3/4 the way through the car. As we were extricating Mr. Ross and Mr. Wardell from the red Fiat, there was an odor of alcohol about the vehicle. There was a blood alcohol done, and it indicates a blood alcohol level of Mr. Ross that was well in the excess of the legal limit, Wyoming's legal 0.10 legal limit.
A blood alcohol test was also done on Christy Cavalack, the driver of the Blue Nova. She had not been drinking.
In the accident, I shattered my right heel and broke my right ankle. I broke my right knee in 3 places. And I had a hole punctured in my larynx, which has changed my voice. I broke my left jaw and knocked out several lower teeth. I broke my left arm in 2 places, cracked my left wrist, shattered my left knee in 8 places, and broke 2 toes on my right foot.
For months after the accident, Christy was in a wheelchair. Her knees were so damaged that doctors feared she might never walk. But after several more operations in which additional steel pins were inserted into her knees, Christy began the fight to walk again.
Okay, remember to pull and push real hard. You have to go faster to catch up to the machine.
The first therapy that we had, my right leg responded great, and my left leg didn't. There was so much scar tissue that it was frozen in one position. And then it took 5.5 months to get from a neutral position, which was completely straight, to a 3/4 bend.
Pull. Pull. Good. Way back there. You gotta rest. Okay, your left foot needs to come in. Walk down and let's see.
The other frustration I had was with my left knee. The swelling is still there. They said that it'll probably never go back to normal. So I have now one leg bigger than the other one. My feeling about the people that were killed, I feel sorry for the passenger, and I feel grief for his family. He left behind a wife and 2 beautiful kids that they didn't have to suffer, but due to the neglect of the driver and his drunkenness, they're suffering as well as I am. And I feel pity, strong pity, for the people that allowed him to get in his automobile and drive, because now they must live with what they've done. I have to live what he did to me, but they have to live with what they've done to him, and I feel sorry for him.
Christy Cavalock was not the only victim of the accident. Becky Wardell's husband, Todd, died in the crash, leaving her a 22-year-old widow. Their second child was born 3 months after Todd's death.
I think I was 19 when I met Todd. And he was so incredibly honest. And he was fun. He always smiled, always laughed, never complained. He's the kind of person that could have one beer and sounded funny. He wasn't really drunk. He could walk around, but you could tell he'd had a beer. And he was raised in a family where drinking was really not the thing to do. So he wasn't that big on it. He always wanted to be where his friends were or where people were. We used to get up in the morning with Brooke, and he'd turn the stereo up, and we'd all dance in our pajamas. And I remember Bill and Cavell coming to the house one day. We're all there dancing in our bathrobes. And they just stood there at the window staring until we noticed them. And it's just hard to never have a day off. To never, I don't know, to never have anyone to share things with. And sometimes I hear somebody say something and it's just the way they say it, or see somebody walking, it's just the way they walk, or see somebody's hands. That just remind me of Todd. It's just really hard to believe even now that he's gone. The hardest thing that I miss is, the hardest thing to think about is the kids. Brooke was real confused now because she just knew who Daddy was when it happened. And now she's convinced that anyone with kids is Daddy. And I can't imagine being Daniel and never even having seen him.
You know, I'm sorry that I didn't do something different to change what had happened. But it's kind of hard to tell a dead person what you should have done to prevent it. I think about what I might have done. I did right after the accident. I don't know, maybe I kind of felt responsible because I knew he was drunk. And I knew, you know, I knew that he was too screwed up to be driving.
Saturday night, the biggest night out in America. Between 9:15 and 9:55, 6 people died. At 9:56, a pedestrian in Wisconsin is hit by a drunk driver. At 10:30, a young mother of 2 is killed by a drunk driver. 2 minutes later, a passenger is killed getting a ride home from work with a friend who has been drinking. The last 3 killed are intoxicated drivers, including Jim Barchi, who is celebrating his raise and promotion at work with champagne. His life ends suddenly at 11:16. Then, for no apparent reason, the streets are quiet. For the final 44 minutes of the day, there are no more deaths. The toll at the end of the day was 81 Americans. 81 Americans killed violently in drunk driving collisions. This was not an unusual day. Any day of the year could have been chosen with similar results. May 17, 1986 is over, but a new day will begin, and the cycle of drunk driving deaths will continue. May 17, Just another day on America's highways.